Special Forces soldier Tang Dao unexpectedly returned to the eve of the Battle of Sihang Warehouse in the Battle of Songhu in 1937. The former 800 soldiers fought to the end for the last dignity of Chinese soldiers. So what will happen with the addition of Tang Dao this time? May I be a ghost on the battlefield after death, and not a native before death? This is the warrior's answer. The beautiful mountains and rivers are picturesque, but the smoke and wolves are everywhere. The soldiers have fought countless battles and shed all their blue blood. Tears run down their paths, filled with hero graves. Keywords of the novel. Rise from 800 without pop-ups, rise from 800 with full download of TXT, rise from 800 with latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Hell and Heaven. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Hell and Heaven. At the end of October 1937, the important town of Songhu in southeastern China. Late at night, the deafening sound of gunfire during the day has basically calmed down. The occasional scattered gunshots in the distance only prove that the war is not yet completely over, and the thick smell of gunpowder slowly wafts towards the noses of every living person here with the autumn wind. Under the moonlight, this once largest financial center in Asia is now in ruins. Several wild dogs shuttle through the ruins, their bodies appearing extremely plump, with blood flowing at the corners of their mouths, appearing extremely ferocious in the bright moonlight. The prosperity of the past dissipated in the autumn wind mixed with a strong smell of gunpowder, as nearly 1 million soldiers from both China and Japan fought for 3 months. In the ruins, a tall and towering building still stands tall, with teams of soldiers wearing steel helmets and deep blue uniforms carrying ammunition boxes, orderly piercing in. There are no lights in the building, perhaps to avoid attracting the attention of the enemy. Only a few torches were lit for illumination, and there are tall and thick walls covering it, so there is not much light visible from outside. In addition to the officers' low growling orders, there were also the slightly heavy footsteps of the soldiers and the crisp tapping sound of firearms accidentally touched. Those who can achieve this in the dark are obviously the elites among the elites, no matter in any era. On the opposite side of the tall building, separated by a river that is no more than 30 meters wide, is a brightly lit neighborhood, with even faint sounds of instruments playing and the gentle and sorrowful singing of a singer. Heaven and hell are only separated by a river. A pair of eyes silently watched all of this in the war ruins across from heaven. Tang Dao has been lying in the mud and water under the brick wall that is only half a person tall for more than 3 hours. As the sharpest blade in China in the past, Tang Dao has been to the highest mountains, the largest ocean, the training camp with the highest mortality rate, and the bloodiest battlefield. No matter how cruel the battlefield here is, it cannot cause him much shock. However, he finds it difficult to understand why he appears here. The memory belonging to Tang Dao still tells him that in order to rescue his comrades, he returned to the team and was unexpectedly hit by enemy heavy artillery during the battle, resulting in his failure to fulfill his promise to stay at the Martyrs' Cemetery. But another memory reminded him that his current location was the Battle of Songhu in the 26th year of the Republic of China, on October 26. On this afternoon, he swallowed his last breath in great loneliness. Is it a battlefield separated by nearly 100 years? It's hard to believe Tang Dao who has come to his senses. However, the body that had once been as tough as gold and stone on the training ground year after year has now been replaced by a young man's body that is about 1.8 meters tall. Touching his own face, the fur on his lips is fine and soft, and it is impossible for him to be over 20 years old. The most direct evidence has already told Tang Dao the answer. I am no longer myself, or I am still myself. When faced with such a huge change, even Tang Dao, who has been in the military for 10 years, has already had a strong mind as refined steel. At that time, I couldn't help but feel a bit unstable. Fortunately, no matter who he is, his identity has not changed. He is still a Chinese and a Chinese warrior. On his current body, he was wearing a somewhat tattered gray-black military uniform, with a blanket and a hat beside him. And the weapons and equipment unique to warriors, nothing, no grenades, no guns, not even a bullet. Yes, no one would leave a weapon specifically for a corpse. The reason why this young man named Tang Dao stayed here at a time when hundreds of thousands of troops were frantically retreating is quite regrettable. He is a wounded soldier, a severely injured person whose internal organs were injured by the terrifying shockwave of a 200 caliber naval gun, belonging to the 26th Division of the Sichuan Army. It was the Sichuan Army Division, which was hailed as one of the 5 best-fought infantry divisions in the entire Battle of Songhu in post-war statistics. It was the heroic Sichuan Army Division, which had over 5,000 soldiers and only over 600 soldiers able to stand out of the battlefield after the war. Tang Dao, on the other hand, was quite lucky. Although he came out lying down, he still had some breathing. And due to his bravery in battle, he was specially sent by the division headquarters to the theater hospital in order to receive better treatment. However, as hundreds of thousands of troops frantically retreated, his luck came to an end. As a dying wounded soldier, he was left here by the theater hospital. War is undoubtedly cruel, and in order for more people to survive, they must learn to give up. Tang Dao can fully understand the choices of doctors and nurses in field hospitals. Abandon the dead and the mortal, and bring the living. The mortality rate of visceral injuries caused by shock waves will exceed 90% in the future, let alone in this era. Perhaps Tang Dao also understood that Tang Dao could not feel any resentment in the consciousness left behind by this body, only regret. Perhaps it's because no one can take him home. From then on, Tang Dao was Tang Dao, and Tang Dao was also Tang Dao. Tang Dao, who had completely gained control of his body, cast his gaze into the sky and silently bid farewell to this strong warrior, which was also a promise. Regardless of the time and space, the duty of a warrior remains unchanged, the heart of our homeland remains unchanged. After Tang Dao accepted all his memories, his stubborn and regretful consciousness completely dissipated. For some unknown reason, the originally fatal internal organ injury miraculously disappeared, and Tang Dao could feel the surging power in this young body. Although it was far from what he had before, it was also extremely rare in this era. Tang Dao estimated that he could have about 50% of his peak period, and he should also be a talented player, otherwise he wouldn't have been a sergeant-class monitor at a young age. Although he is just a soldier, he is still a soldier. From dusk to the hazy night, for a full 3 hours, Tang Dao, who had already gained control of his body, did not move his body half an inch, but only moved his fingers and joints to maintain flexibility with extremely small movements. Whoever looks, it's just a corpse. Because Tang Dao could feel that there were countless gazes on the other side of the concession, and his body must have been discovered by them long ago. In order not to shock the world, then let those people continue to treat him as a corpse. More importantly, Tang Dao cannot leave, he needs to wait. Because, if Tang Dao's memory is not mistaken, the tall and heavy building 200 meters away in front of him is called the Four Rose Warehouse, the former location of the treasury of 4 banks in the Republic of China. Now, it happens to be October 26th, and it is from today on that this building will be remembered in history. A battle that will catch the attention of the whole world will erupt here. Because this will become the last strong fortress of the isolated army in this southeast important town of China, representing the last honor of Chinese soldiers. It is here, and the Battle of Songhu has not yet ended. It is here, and Songhu is still in the hands of Chinese soldiers. Of course, the reason why Tang Dao is waiting here is not to become one of the famous people in history. But rather, he has to survive. If encountering the Japanese army, even if their physical fitness is far inferior to before, even if they are unarmed, even if it is a 1.1 battle, they have confidence that the strongest blade of the past will eventually survive. However, now that the Japanese army has almost occupied the entire area of Songhu, he is facing the 300,000 Japanese army that has already surrounded Songhu tightly. To live, one must join this lonely army, seemingly dead and in dire straits. In fact, the stubborn ruts of history have told everyone that there is also a glimmer of vitality. Not only for oneself, but also for this lone army. Knowing their future, Tang Dao can accept them dying in battle on this battlefield, but cannot accept them dying in despicable political compromises. So, put the dead to the death and bring about rebirth. For myself and for them. And now, the person Tang Dao has to wait for has arrived. The 1st Battalion of the 524th Regiment of the 88th Division has arrived. They are actually not 800, but 400. To be precise, there are 414 people, including their highest commander, Lieutenant Colonel, and Deputy Regiment. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Veteran Youzi. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Veteran Youzi. 2 hours before evening, although Tang Dao did not move his body, he had already observed the environment around the Four Rows warehouse very clearly, and he had even determined the route of the Japanese army's attack tomorrow. Until night comes. Under the moonlight, Tang Dao watched from a distance as the slightly emaciated commander commanded the soldiers to fish through the 4 rows of warehouses, burying landmines in the ruins outside the warehouse, and building fortifications with sandbags at the entrance of the warehouse until they dispatched reconnaissance troops to conduct reconnaissance in the surrounding ruins. Tang Dao took a deep breath and knew that the opportunity to approach them had finally arrived. Tang Dao was very clear that even though he was wearing the uniform of the 26th Division of the Sichuan Army, if he rashly ran out and demanded to join, the only result would be being treated as a deserter and taken to justice. The reason is simple. A soldier who has not retreated and is still fully intact on the battlefield can only flee or surrender. With a complete set of German equipment, it is claimed that China's most elite infantry division has the most rigorous military discipline, and at this time, who else can you expect to bother to verify your background? The most worry-free thing is to kill it with one shot. The rustling footsteps were getting closer and closer, and Tang Dao remained in his position until a gun hit the back of his head. A rough voice rang out. "You coward, are you pretending to be addicted? Get up my ass, or else I'll give you a shot so you don't have to struggle with it in the future." Tang Dao remained motionless until the barrel mercilessly thrust fiercely, pressing his face firmly against the ground before slowly raising his hands. A rough laugh echoed from behind. "What's going on? Xiashanzi, I'll say this coward is pretending to be dead." "Brother Jiojin, how did you tell?" another voice, who appeared younger, asked curiously. "If you want to survive on the battlefield of Dog Day, you need to watch and use your brain more," said the bold voice with a hint of pride and a hint of teaching tone. "You see, this coward, although he was determined to lie motionless in the mud, he did it behind his back." "What does that mean? Does it mean that he subconsciously chooses where to work when lying down?" The young voice was a bit unsure of his answer. "That's just one of them," replied the bold voice. "The most important thing is to indicate that he has a body temperature." "I understand, that clothes were covered and dried by him," the young voice suddenly realized. The barrel of the gun with Tang Dao's neck lowered behind him moved back slightly, indicating that Tang Dao would stand up. Still holding his hands up, Tang Dao slowly got up and turned around. A veteran with a slanted steel helmet, a short stature, a thin face but a hint of ferocity was looking at him disdainfully. Standing beside him was a young soldier in his 20s with thick eyebrows and big eyes that appeared somewhat naive. Based on the rank on their collar, the soldier approaching the age of 30 is just a sergeant, obviously a veteran oilseed. However, based on what he just said, his observation and judgment are not weak, which is one of the reasons why he was able to survive the continuous battle in Shanghai. And young soldiers around the age of 20 are already upper-class soldiers, only 2 levels inferior to veteran soldiers, which is clearly more recognized by the commander. 2 guns were aimed at Tang Dao, but neither of them was tall. In front of Tang Dao, who was 1.8 meters tall, they were half a head shorter. When Tang Dao raised his hands, he even eliminated both of them. Goeri Bai has grown such a big stature, a coward. Veteran Youzi clearly felt pressure in front of Tang Dao's much taller physique than ordinary people in this era, and his mouth slightly tilted and cursed. Take me to see your chief Xie. Tang Dao came straight to the point. Why are you yawning like a toad? Your tone is quite loud. You actually want to see our regimental deputy. The old soldier was extremely disdainful at first, and suddenly his face tightened, straightening the slightly lowered muzzle of his gun. Who are you? How do you know our officer's surname is Xie? The 1st Battalion of the 524th Regiment was ordered to guard the Sihang Warehouse, which was already a secret military operation. Not only did the Japanese who were still advancing towards the city of Songhu not know, but also the Westerners in the opposite concession did not know. Even the entire officers and soldiers of the 1st Battalion only knew what they were going to do after entering the Sihang Warehouse 20 minutes ago. But the coward who had been hiding in the ruins and packing corpses in front of him actually knew the surname of his highest official. At this moment, the veteran with a meticulous thinking did not explode like a cat with its tail stepped on, which was a strange thing. However, his reaction was clearly a bit slow. Just as the muzzle of the gun was lifted, Tang Dao's left hand, which was hanging down, flashed out, tilting the muzzle and deceiving himself. His left finger actually inserted the trigger at the moment when veteran Youzi was about to decisively pull it, making it impossible for him to pull it again. This is not the real reason why veteran Youzi suddenly stiffened, but rather a sharp wooden stick suddenly pressed against his chin, with the other end naturally in the hands of the young man he called a coward. The entire process was described in a tedious manner, but it never exceeded a second. It wasn't until this moment that the upper-class soldiers on the side realized it. How dare you? The upper soldier roared and aimed his rifle flat at Tang Dao, who had already pounced into the old soldier's arms. Tang Dao, however, seemed to have not seen him before. Instead, he looked at the old soldier Youzi, whose face had changed greatly. He grinned slightly, revealing his white teeth. Coupled with his dark yet handsome face, he appeared very sunny and spoke in an incredibly gentle tone. Guess, before his shot pierced through both of us, could I pierce this piece of wood through your relatively soft skin? At that moment, veteran Youzi was so scared that even his hair stood up. No need to guess, he also knew that the tree stick, which had already been sharpened to a very sharp point, could not only easily pierce the chin, but also penetrate the brain without any obstacles. There is a hard celestial cover on the skull to protect it, but those things don't grow inside. And that young man, although laughing, relied on the intuition he had developed after more than a decade in the military. Veteran Youzi dared to conclude that he would definitely do so before the gunshot rang. Perhaps he will die, but he will definitely die even more tragically. Especially at the thought of his brain being stirred into a sticky mess by a wooden stick, sweat dripped down the old soldier's oily face. Then, in the next moment, I saw the coward Sher Shiran throwing away his stick, taking his hand off the trigger, taking a step back and standing in front of his gun, with a smile still on his face, looking towards the upper private. Soldier, you forgot to open your insurance. This is a lunatic. This is no longer confidence, but arrogance. He was so arrogant that he thought he could still kill the enemy at the moment they pulled the trigger. But what's scary is that veteran Youzi's intuition tells him he can. Even if he is less than half a meter away from his gun now, even if he has nothing in his hands. Looking at the man wearing the Sichuan military uniform across from him, veteran Youzi's grip on the gun remained steady, but perhaps only he knew that his palms were already covered in slippery sweat, which was a physical manifestation of his fear of Japanese 200 caliber naval guns in the trenches. Now, we can have a good conversation. Tang Dao's face remained calm. You can still suspect that I am a deserter, but there is no need to suspect that I am a Japanese disguised as Turtle's son. Gu Laozi's Japanese can learn northeastern dialect, and he is so stubborn that he can learn my Sichuan dialect. The faces of veteran Youzi and the upper-class soldiers trembled slightly, not because Tang Dao suddenly burst out familiar with Sichuan dialect, but because the reasons he said were really irrefutable. The muzzle of the two guns subconsciously lowered. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. The past 800. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 The past 800. Of course, the most important reason for making the two soldiers lower their guns is that Tang Dao, with his previous move, has already proven that he is not a coward. Coward, dare to face the gun and retaliate angrily. This is impossible, even when faced with a butcher's knife. The only reaction of a sheep is to scream in panic. Veteran Youzi's intuition told him that the person from Sichuan across from him must have killed many people. The strong smell of blood on his body was emanating from his bones. With his displayed skills, he was already capable of killing both of himself without disturbing others. He inserted a piece of wood into his own brain, grabbed his gun, and with a single thrust, he was able to pierce through the panicked private who had not yet opened the safety. In such close proximity, bullets are not as useful as a bayonet. You wait, I'll ask Shanzi to report to the chief first. Whether or not to see you is up to the chief to decide. Veteran Youzi calmed down and rushed up to the private with a mouthful. The upper-class soldier's face was flushed with anger, his lips twitched as he wanted to speak, but in the face of the veteran Youzi's somewhat gloomy gaze, he didn't say anything after all. He turned his gun back and ran towards the 4-rows warehouse 200 meters away without looking back. Tang Dao smiled and took 2 steps back on his own, slowly moving his body in front of the alert veteran Youzi in his eyes. He certainly knew that this was a delaying tactic by veteran Youzi, just calling for help, but he was not the enemy, let alone the Japanese army, and that was the most important thing. Tang Dao is even less afraid that veteran Youzi will shoot. The Japanese army, less than a kilometer away, may have already started cooking at this time, but it does not mean that they will not come to inspect when they hear the gunfire. The commanders of the 1st Battalion of the 524th Regiment, who have not yet set up various defensive structures, should have reminded the soldiers not to shoot unless absolutely necessary. My body, which had been frozen for several days in the cold wind of late autumn in Songhu, although he was reborn with enough warmth due to his arrival and regained the flexibility of his hands and feet after several hours of adjustment, it still appeared slightly stiff. Otherwise, he could have been faster by 0.3 seconds just now. Collapse, collapse, collapse. The explosive sound was like a beam, as Tang Dao's somewhat strange stretching movements erupted. Tang Dao's eyes showed a satisfied expression. This physical talent is astonishing, with even stronger bones and muscles than his former self. Over time, he can achieve even greater breakthroughs in individual combat power. Veteran Youzi's pupils suddenly shrank. At this point, he realized that he still underestimated the young man in front of him. After 10 years on the battlefield, he may not have become very strong, but his vision has been cultivated. As the saying goes, practice one breath internally, practice muscles, bones, and skin externally. The internal qi generally stabilizes the internal organs with a long-lasting and amazing endurance, while the concept of muscles, bones, and skin is simple to understand, but it can provide a certain level of impact strength by making the muscles thick, bones hard, and skin thick. And the man in front of him, as soon as he trembled with force, could make an explosive sound similar to interlocking bones. Some experienced veteran Youzi knew that it was not interlocking bones, but had reached a level where he could freely control the vibration of his fascia. Among the strong men he had seen in these years, there would never be more than 3 who could match him. If combined with his calm demeanor towards the muzzle and the bloody smell emanating from his bones, this person is definitely rare in solo combat, and his subordinates have countless lives. Fortunately, he is Chinese. This is a thought that keeps flowing through the somewhat blank mind of veteran Youzi. Quickly, the upper-class soldiers ran over with 8 or 9 infantry, and also received orders from the highest commander to take Tang Dao to his command center. 3 minutes later, Tang Dao saw the man depicted in movies, TV dramas, and history books. Xie Jinyuan, a 4th-generation student from Huangpu, was a lieutenant colonel and regimental subordinate from the northern expedition to the Battle of Songhu. In the early stages of the Battle of Songhu, he was promoted to deputy regimental commander due to the death of the regimental commander, and during these 2 months, he was appointed as the acting regimental commander of the 524th Regiment. This time, he was ordered to be the highest commander stationed in the Sihang Warehouse. The army lieutenant colonel, with thick eyebrows, big eyes, and big ears, was wearing a straight dark blue woolen school official uniform, wearing long leather boots. His body was straight, and his gaze was deep as he looked at Tang Dao, who was pointed at by several guns and stood straight 3 meters away. After a long time, he asked, "Which unit are you from? Why are you in the defense area of my 88th Division?" "Sir, report to you, Sergeant Tang Dao of the 3rd Platoon, 2nd Company, 1st Battalion, 2nd Regiment, 152nd Regiment, 26th Division, 43rd Army." Tang Dao took a step forward, raised his right hand to salute the army, and saw that the lieutenant colonel was non-committal. His left hand leaned into his arms. There was a sound of gun bolts around, and the lieutenant colonel frowned slightly and waved his hand lightly. Tang Dao took out a piece of paper and placed it in the hand of the veteran Youzi who was closest to him. He looked at the army lieutenant colonel and said solemnly, "Sir, this is the only document I can prove my identity at the moment. Please verify it." Tang Dao, a sergeant of the 1st Battalion of the 152nd Regiment, fought bravely in the Battle of Sihang and was specially promoted to the rank of lieutenant in the army. He hopes to receive new achievements. Guo of the 26th Division, a major beside Xie Jinyuan, took the paper and read softly. "Is it the soldier of Jiguji Jicheng?" The army lieutenant colonel heard the number of the 152nd Regiment and his eyes flashed with admiration. He murmured, "After death, I would rather be a battlefield ghost than a native. Your Jicheng is really a model for our generation." Tang Dao knew who he was talking about. He was the hero commander of the 152nd Regiment of the 26th Division of the Sichuan Army. Before the war, when he bid farewell to his old mother in tears, he left behind a famous couplet that has been passed down for generations. However, in a battle 4 days ago, he was hit by heavy Japanese artillery and his bones were nowhere to be found. The original Tang Dao was also seriously injured in this battle. Didn't you just call yourself Tang Dao? Why is the name written on this certificate Tang Dao?" After a brief sigh, the army lieutenant colonel narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at Tang Dao. "My father named me Tao, hoping that I could learn strategic skills and be full of knowledge to serve the country." Tang Dao remained calm, his voice resounding and powerful. But on the occasion of the massive invasion of the Japanese invaders and the imminent collapse of the country, the belly full of knowledge and skills of the Taiping era was no longer of great use. Tang Dao changed its name to Dao, hoping to become the sword of our Chinese clan, defend our clan, and kill the invading invaders. Even if one dies, the sword remains. The whole room was silent, and many people's eyes were filled with respect. Half an hour ago, everyone here had already been informed of the military orders they had received, and as the last army in the theater of war, they were stationed at the Sihang Warehouse in the north of Songhu. Although everyone already knows that they are determined to die, the complexity within their hearts, whether fear, passion, or melancholy, is only known to themselves. And the young soldier in front of him who changed his name to Dao seemed to have a glimmer of light on his body as he spoke out his reasons. Of course, more importantly, he is a soldier of the 26th Division. Wearing straw sandals, carrying a bamboo hat, and wearing a smoking gun, the beggar Sichuan army walked all the way from the expensive land of Sichuan to Songhu. People were only 3 melons and 2 jujubes, and guns were inferior to the flowing old hanyang. There were even old mouse and bird guns. This kind of army, not to mention the Japanese army with planes and warships to support them, is not even valued by friendly forces themselves. But in the Battle of Sihang, the 26th Division impressed both the enemy and us. The fierce battle lasted for 7 days and nights, with a casualty rate of up to 85% for any unit that had already collapsed. However, the 26th Division remained in position until reinforcements entered and replaced them. The sight of 600 people carrying 200 wounded soldiers walking down from the position was extremely sad, even causing the Japanese army on the opposite side to break free from shelling for the first time. The bodies of the deceased in battle cannot be transported to the rear, but are almost unnecessary. At the most urgent moment of the battle, the remains of the soldiers have been built into fortifications. The young Sichuan army, before death, fired bullets at the Japanese pirates. After death, they used their bodies as walls to block bullets fired at their comrades. Colonel Jiaguji, the commander of the 152nd Regiment, who was previously mentioned by a lieutenant colonel in the army, took the lead and served as the commander of a regiment on the front line, ultimately dying on the battlefield. 26th Division, gained fame in World War I. No one underestimates the beggar soldiers who emerge from the depths of the mountains, including the Sichuan army lieutenant who, for some unknown reason, has fallen to this place in front of the Imperial Guards. Good. Great. The name Tang Dao is good. I believe you are a soldier of the 26th Division, and for the sake of the 26th Division's reputation, I don't want to delve into the reason why you are stranded here. The Army Lieutenant Colonel frowned. I'm sorry, my brothers from the 524th Regiment and I are executing a secret military order from the theater headquarters, so we can only send you away, little brother. Glancing at a white-faced army captain beside him, he said, Captain, get this little brother a gun and give him 10 bullets. Let him leave here. Captain Bai Mian looked at his superior with some surprise. As a subordinate who has been following this lieutenant colonel for several years, he knows his superior very well. Although he has a generous personality, he is an extremely strict soldier, especially after going to the battlefield. He is a decisive and qualified commander. The deserter fell into his hands and had only two choices. Either to turn around and charge towards the enemy line to make a living, or to take action on the spot. The young man in front of him, although he had a promotion order that could prove his identity, had a greater suspicion of desertion. The 600 remaining soldiers of the 26th Division had already left for another battlefield a few days ago. But what's going on today? How could the young man in front of me be so easily let go? Could it be just a few passionate words from him just now? However, under the dim yellow light of the swaying horse lamp hanging on the roof, the square face of the army colonel was dim and unclear, making it difficult to guess his true intention. While the captain pondered the thoughts of his own superior, Tang Dao also gave his own answer. Shaking his head, he said, I'm sorry sir, I can't leave. P.S. Some children's boots want to join the group, public group number 275952626, end of this chapter. Chapter 4. Petition. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Petition. The Army Lieutenant Colonel seemed to have already anticipated Tang Dao's answer and didn't find it strange at all. Can you tell me the reason? Firstly, the Japanese army has occupied Songhu. Leaving here, no matter which direction they are heading, there are countless Japanese invaders. Even Zhao Zilong from Changshan is powerless. Staying here is the only way to survive. Tang Dao extended a finger. Another finger extended and said, secondly, if I take my gun and ammunition and leave, I probably won't have to worry about the number of Japanese pirates anymore. Sir, the precise shooter you set up on the roof of the Four Rose Warehouse is not a decoration. The Army Lieutenant Colonel's eyes narrowed slightly, and a cold light faintly appeared under his eyelids. Obviously, the second reason Tang Dao mentioned was not his unfounded imagination, it was almost something that could happen. This decisive commander is not someone who indiscriminately kills, but he will never show any mercy towards a soldier who flees from the battlefield. This is just a test. The atmosphere suddenly became a bit tense, and the soldiers behind Tang Dao involuntarily clenched their guns, especially the veteran who brought Tang Dao over. His vest began to sweat again, and he knew the danger of Tang Dao the most. He. You deserve to be a soldier of the 26th Division. The Army Lieutenant Colonel suddenly let out a light laugh. Not bad, whether you are deserting or not, as long as you leave here, there is a possibility of leakage. No one can harm our unit's combat operation. The dim yellow lights were reflected in the cold eyes of the army colonel, like two leaping flames. Great, just because you dare to tell the truth, I will give you a chance to prove yourself, and then stay with my 524th Regiment to fight against the Japanese invaders. I will report to the division headquarters and add your name, so that you don't have to bear the name of a deserter even if you die. Thank you, sir. Tang Dao stood at attention and saluted. Then, as he turned around and walked outside, Tang Dao reached out his hand and said, "Brother, I'll use your guy." The superior turned around to look at the army colonel behind him, and after receiving a slight gesture from his forehead, he handed Tang Dao the formal rifle he was carrying on his back. The well-known early model of the Chinese official rifle, modeled after the German famous 1924 Mauser rifle, is also the most mature domestically produced rifle production line in China. The gun without a bayonet is 1.11 meters long and is not a disadvantage in edge-to-edge combat. The bayonet is 0.57 meters long, with 5 built-in magazines and 7.92 mm caliber bullets. It has an effective range of 1,000 meters and a firing rate of 15 rounds per minute. The V-notch sight is a standard single-soldier firearm of the German division, and its performance is not only the strongest among the Chinese Army's configurations, but also slightly inferior to the Type 38 rifle currently configured by the Japanese Army. Although it is an outdated gun compared to decades later, Tang Dao, who loves to study various firearms, is no stranger. He even achieved stunning results with 10 shots and 98 rings in the shooting range using even more ancient and old-fashioned Hanyang-made guns and 200-meter-away moving targets. He pulled the bolt of the gun with great skill, checked the maintenance and loading of the firearm, and then took the 2 5-round magazines handed over by the upper-class soldier and stuffed them into his pocket. He carried the gun and strode towards the outside of the 4-row warehouse. The so-called proof is nothing more than submitting a statement. From a kilometer or even further away, scattered gunshots could be heard from time to time, as scattered soldiers and small groups of Japanese troops who were still cleaning the battlefield overnight to search for remaining enemies engaged in battle. The meaning of an army lieutenant colonel is very clear. The Imperial Guards can accept new blood, but they will never accept useless soldiers. If Tang Dao wants to prove himself and join them for the last chance of survival, he must go hunting the Japanese army in the ruins. If he can kill 1 or 2 and still retreat, then he is qualified. Those who can slaughter Japanese pirates are heroes, and the proof in the army is so simple. That's not something that Tang Dao once passionately said could be done. Anyone who has been reading for a few days will be good at it, but if you want to become a Japanese aggressor, you have to rely on your true abilities. Looking at Tang Dao, who had already walked out of the warehouse gate, the superior hesitated for a moment. He took off 2 hand grenades from his waist and chased after him, handing them along with his German steel helmet. The enemy is fierce, brother Sichuan, be careful. Looking at the helmet and grenade in the hands of the upper-class soldier, and then at the honest and sincere face of the upper-class soldier, Tang Dao grinned slightly, revealing a healthy white tooth and patted the upper-class soldier's shoulder, saying, "Don't worry, I'm here, the Japanese should be careful." The group of officers and soldiers who followed almost didn't give Tang Dao such a full expression of anger and joy. As one of the best equipped and most powerful German divisions among the 700,000-strong Chinese army in the Battle of Songhu, the 88th Division has always been at the forefront, and its own supplementary regiment has long been depleted. 3 waves of additional soldiers from the local miscellaneous army have been added, and the bloody battle time is definitely at the forefront of the 700,000-strong army. When it comes to understanding the combat effectiveness of the Japanese army, they say they are third, so there is basically no team that dares to be first or second. The Japanese army not only had heavy firepower far exceeding that of the Chinese army due to the presence of the army's heavy artillery squadron, the navy's large-caliber naval guns, and a large number of fighter jets, but their infantry was also well equipped and had extremely strong tactical literacy. Both the individual tactical accomplishment and the offensive and defensive tactics of small teams and squadrons are superior to the vast majority of Chinese forces. The division-level forces that can compete with them, the 700,000 Chinese troops gathered on hundreds of square kilometers of land in Songhu, are the essence of China's millions of large armies, but they cannot be counted out. The 88th Division is one of these few troops, fighting fiercely against the Japanese invaders for 3 months. While suffering heavy losses, it also made the Japanese army cry and cry for mercy. Its military achievements are remarkable, but no one dares to underestimate the Japanese invaders, from lieutenant generals, division commanders to second-class soldiers. Do you know that this kid dares to make such a big stabbing remark? Even the lieutenant colonel in the army had a hint of disappointment in his eyes at this moment. Tang Dao has a good appearance and comes from the 26th Division, which became famous during World War I, coupled with his enthusiasm just now, it is difficult not to leave a deep impression on people. If it weren't for that, the army lieutenant colonel from Huangpu would have any chance to prove his intentions at this moment, just be shot dead. Then, Tang Dao turned his head and said in a loud voice to the army lieutenant colonel standing at the warehouse gate, "Sir, at this point in time, you shouldn't be worried that the Japanese might know you and your unit are here. Can you let the brothers start a fire and give me a light?" The lieutenant colonel's gaze narrowed slightly, but he instinctively nodded and waved his hand, indicating that the soldiers around him who had already entered the fortification were lighting torches. Dozens of torches were lit, illuminating the open space in front of the 4 rows of warehouses. In the firelight, the faces of the officers and soldiers with live ammunition were somewhat puzzled. No one knows what Tang Dao wants to do. Including an army lieutenant colonel standing straight. Tang Dao picked up a fist-sized stone from the ground and said to the superior soldier, "Keep your eyes wide and see clearly. I'll only demonstrate it once." A fist-sized stone was thrown high by Tang Dao. Under the moonlight, the stones thrown into the sky were almost indistinct, but with such a casual throw, at least 30 meters high, it displayed the terrifying power hidden in Tang Dao's body. Just, a little bit of personal strength is useless in front of bullets. Perhaps only a few people can understand what he wants to do. He should be able to raise his gun and shoot, performing a precise and thrilling shot. A stone that falls from a high altitude can land in just a few seconds due to gravitational acceleration, and hitting it during this process is no less difficult than reaching the sky. But whether you understand or don't understand, both are wrong. The king of individual soldiers from 90 years later is even more unimaginable in this era. P.S. The signed contract is expected to be sent out tomorrow, please change the status on Friday. If you want to invest, invest quickly. Before signing the contract and recommending, follow the usual practice of 1 change per day, and at least 2 changes per day after recommending. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Reasons for coming here. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Reasons for coming here. Tang Dao suddenly moved at the moment when the stone was thrown to the top of the sky. Suddenly transitioning from extreme stillness to movement, his figure seemed to leave only a remnant in the retina at that moment. Quick, extremely fast. But not only that. Pop. In such extreme movements, a person's body is inevitably swaying, but Tang Dao actually fired a gun. A shot was fired, and the stone in the high altitude was unexpectedly hit, breaking into several pieces. Due to the kinetic energy of the bullet, it spread in all directions. The pupils of a burly man who had been standing by the side of an army lieutenant colonel tightened sharply. His name is Lei Xiong, and his position is as the platoon leader of the 1st Battalion Machine Artillery Company of the 524th Regiment. For 3 consecutive years, the 1st Battalion has ranked among the top 3 in the entire 88th Division in major military competitions, making him a well-known sharp sword unit. However, the Machine Artillery Company is indispensable, and the most unconventional thing is that this platoon leader of the Machine Artillery Company is the first in the 88th Division's pincer skills. However, Lei Xiong, who has extremely strong individual combat capabilities, likes to control heavy machine guns and mortars rather than wielding knives. He enjoys the thrill of continuous shooting and the sense of achievement of accurately delivering shells to the opponent's head. Undoubtedly, he is a career soldier with alternative but extremely strong career choices. Only professional soldiers like Lei Xiong who have reached the pinnacle of various tactical skills can see that Tang Dao pulls the trigger when the kinetic energy and gravity of the rising stone reach a balance point, and the entire stone enters a floating state of 0.1 seconds in the air. This shot almost represents the pinnacle of a professional soldier's marksmanship. If he had done it himself, perhaps he would have achieved a hit rate of 2 shots with 5 shots in the air. However, Lei Xiong still underestimated Tang Dao. Because this thrust and shot may just be the beginning of Tang Dao's performance. A shot was fired, and Tang Dao didn't even look at it. He continued to pounce forward, as if there was already a barrage of bullets ahead. During the process of pouncing, his entire body shrank into a ball shape, with the receiving surface reduced to the extreme. Then, in just 1 second, the body shrunk into a ball moved forward at high speed by 5 or 6 meters. The stone fragments that were hit by bullets in the sky have begun to fall. Then, Tang Dao's muzzle protruded and fired a second bullet. Pop! The largest piece of debris in the air was hit by him with 1 shot, and at the moment when kinetic energy and potential energy reached equilibrium, it was shattered with 1 shot. On sight, everyone fell completely silent. All present are the iron-blooded army who have survived 100 battles. They all understand a truth. As a marksman, they must ensure their physical balance, and the target, sight, and eyes must be aligned at 3 points to accurately hit the target. But the man in front of me completely broke this pattern. His body is moving at high speed, dodging seemingly non-existent gunfire to the extreme, but every person who has experienced such situations knows that he can avoid it. More importantly, in such an evasive tactical action that fully unleashes the potential of the human body, he can also hit a rock in the sky that is scattered and shows no signs of being found. This is simply unbelievable. If it is said that he was blinded, then it can only be said that the Sanqing immortal no longer favors him. Quickly, Tang Dao had already rolled into the side of a low wall, and with 2 consecutive shots from behind, it proved that not all powerful people relied on luck this time. Tang Dao, who was half kneeling, lifted the gun with 1 hand. The bolt of the gun was pulled by the other hand during the lifting process, and the muzzle was stable enough to drop a fly, pulling the trigger. Pop! The fragments of debris flying from the sky were shattered once again. Faced with such a miracle, the expression on the face of the initiator remained unchanged. He pulled the bolt of the gun with his left hand again, changed to holding the gun with both hands, his eyes fixed on the aiming star, and the muzzle swayed slightly. The entire action was like flowing clouds in water, without hesitation pulling the trigger again. Crush a stone that is no longer the size of an egg. Fist-sized stones turned into rain of stones, falling down one after another. Amidst the dull gazes of the crowd, Tang Dao stood up and carried the rifle that had already fired 4 rounds on his back. The body is as straight as a javelin, and the chest slightly undulates. Obviously, these extremely difficult movements are not completely without burden for Tang Dao. However, this can also prove that he is still a human, not a god. The elite members of the Imperial Guards, represented by Lei Xiong, have already begun to calculate desperately in their minds how many opportunities they would have to defeat such an enemy. Unfortunately, their dim gaze had already told them the answer. Encountering such a terrifying guy alone on the battlefield has basically declared that one can return to Grandma's house. But what frustrates these elite armies even more may not just be individual soldiers, the army is probably a group. No matter how powerful the enemy is, even if they stand shoulder to shoulder, they can still defeat him. Unfortunately, as several sergeant squad leaders exchanged glances with each other, their intuition was desperately telling themselves that even if they were alone, even with an infantry squad and no heavy firearms to suppress them, they would encounter him in such ruins. I don't know how many people would eventually escape birth. Yes, it's not a battle, it's escape. Even though these elite armies may not want to admit their battlefield intuition that has gradually been honed on the battlefield, the intuition that has only been realized through countless lives and deaths is so straightforward to tell them. If both sides were holding rifles, this terrifying guy would have the ability to kill more than 10 people, and in such a dark night, without artillery coverage, his almost ghostly movements and incredible shooting skills would be the king of the night. If he doesn't escape, an infantry squad will be killed in this ruins with a chilling shot. Fortunately, he is Chinese, he is ours, and countless soldiers came up with this idea at that moment. Tang Dao returned and walked towards the young soldier who brought him helmets and grenades. The young soldier looked at the man whose individual combat power had reached its peak and couldn't help but feel a bit at a loss. Does such a strong person still need the care of a soldier? Brother, what's your name? Tang Dao asked softly. Report, Yang Shaoshan. The extremely proud members of the Imperial Guards instinctively used the words report. Thank you for living well. I look forward to working together to defeat the Japanese devils. You will be a good soldier. Tang Dao picked up the soldier's grenade and helmet with one hand and patted his shoulder. Although Tang Dao is as young as the soldiers, no one thinks there is anything wrong with him encouraging the soldiers like this. This is the right of the strong. Staring at Tang Dao's figure about to turn around again, Yang Shaoshan didn't even know why. He suddenly let out a loud cry, Big brother, I will work hard to survive and kill the devils with you. Take care of yourself. Tang Dao frowned and smiled. I like your bloodline and your sincerity and care for comrades in arms. Remember to keep this bloodline and care, because during this national crisis, we Chinese soldiers must unite as a whole. As long as we resist Japan, we are all brothers, which is also the reason why I came here. Staring at the back of Tang Dao, who had his helmet fastened to his head, grenades inserted into his belt, and walked into the ruins with his gun in hand, the young soldier in the darkness seemed to have a glimmer of light in his eyes. As long as we resist Japan, we are all brothers. The gaze of the army lieutenant colonel, who had been silently watching everything from afar, was also flickering in the flames. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. The True Bait. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. The True Bait. Lei Xiong, what do you think? Army Lieutenant Colonel looked at Tang Dao's figure disappearing into the darkness in the distance and asked in a low voice. What a powerful guy. Lei Xiong's eyes flickered with surprise, giving his own evaluation. Is it because of his individual skills and tactics? The army colonel remained non-committal. No, in terms of individual skills and tactics, it's not something we can match, but in such a battlefield, how can a person be so powerful and useful? The Japanese bombarded them with a cannon, even the immortals couldn't bear it. Lei Xiong shook his head, with a hint of bitterness on his face. His greatest skill is scheming. How do you say it? A slightly younger captain on the other side asked curiously. Do you remember asking the regimental deputy before he started, are you not afraid that the Japanese army will know about our presence here? Lei Xiong asked. Remember, you're saying he already knows we've set up fortifications and minefields, and he's not afraid of Japanese attacks. The captain took a cold breath. This guy's brain melon seeds are quite effective. It's not just here. Lei Xiong shook his head. Even if he doesn't shoot, we will still make a noise to alarm the Japanese army and let them know that we are here after the setup is completed. If the Japanese army were arrogant and came rashly, we would be able to give them a harsh first charge and interest before dawn. By tomorrow morning, the Japanese army will have sufficient observation vision, so it may not be so easy guessing correctly. The deputy's next plan is only secondary. His 4 consecutive gunshots belong to the sound of a single rifle. In that case, it would attract more Japanese troops searching here than a small squad. With the strength he has just demonstrated, such a force will not fall into a desperate situation. In this way, it not only fully demonstrates his strength and intelligence, but also completes the proof that the deputy team leader requires him to do, which can be considered as 3 birds with 1 stone. Lei Xiong looked at the army colonel with admiration in his eyes and said, "If this guy can come back alive, Lieutenant Colonel, my platoon leader was killed in battle the day before yesterday, he can just take over." A group of officers were collectively surprised. Although Tang Dao's performance just now was extremely impressive, it is not enough to enter a legitimate Imperial Army sequence like the 88th Division, especially for military officers. They must be guaranteed by officers at or above the school level and signed with the approval of a Major General. Although Lei Xiong's rank is only a captain, Colonel Jean is basically a definite matter. Listening to his intention, he actually wanted to use his military position as a guarantee to accept this sergeant from the Sichuan army and serve as the platoon leader of his machine gun platoon. This cost is too high. If there is anything wrong with that Tang Dao, even if Lei Xiong dies in battle, all his benefits will be stripped away. Just because of your unclear analysis just now, no way. The army lieutenant colonel snorted lightly and then sighed slightly. You still underestimated him. In the firelight, the colonel's gaze towards the distance became even colder. He just used gunshots as bait to lure a small group of Japanese soldiers to prove to us that he was fearless, but in fact, the most important thing was to use the upcoming small group of Japanese soldiers as bait to lure more Japanese troops towards our warehouse in the 4 rows. Under the moonlight, the gaze of a lieutenant colonel in the army was chilling. How could they attack our small fortress at night without the support of planes and heavy artillery, without the need to stimulate the proud commander of the Imperial Japanese Army with more than 10 Japanese corpses? If you want to fish, you can't be stingy with the bait. Deputy, do you mean that he just demonstrated his strength, not to intimidate us, but to tell us that he has the ability to kill more than 10 Japanese soldiers? Lei Xiong took a cold breath. Not too stupid. If your machine gun platoon can kill 30 devils tonight, then I can consider your application just now, said the army lieutenant colonel with a smile on his face. Go to 2 people, take 100 bullets and 8 hand grenades and send them over. Follow him along and report back to me on how he killed the Japanese. Before Lei Xiong could speak, the previous white-faced captain's gaze slightly turned, and he pointed his finger at the old soldier Youzi in the superior soldier, saying, Li Jiujin and Yang Shaoshan, you 2 should be familiar with him. You go. Then he turned around and shouted to the soldiers around him, brothers in a row, don't be fooled. Continue to reinforce the fortifications. If the Japanese don't come later, forget it. As long as they come, aim and hit me. Also, the deputy commander has spoken up. Whoever can kill 30 devils will be rewarded. My reward from Shangguan Cloud is to find a powerful platoon leader for you. Give me a little bit of a fight, don't let the scumbags in the machine gun company take advantage of it. You're such a shameless Shangguan, you dare to snatch someone I like. Lei Xiong reacted and couldn't help but jump and curse. Oh no. No, it's okay to just grab someone. Why do you curse me for being a machine cannon and a jerk while wiping your master? Surprisingly catching, over 90% of the officers grinned happily. No one expected that a platoon leader named Shangguan Yun, who came from an academic background and had a bit of bookishness, would come up with such a move. Did this show off his true nature as he looked to be heroic? However, looking at the Thunder Tiger, who has always liked to eat more and occupy more, being so angry by the scholar captain, the other 2 infantry company leaders didn't know why in their hearts. How could they be so happy? But Shangguan Yun, who ordered his subordinates not to forget to damage a colleague, had already rushed into the warehouse like a gust of wind. He needs to set up his machine gun firepower and cold gun shooting points located on the 1st floor. After all, killing 30 Japanese soldiers is not an easy task. After 3 months of fighting in Songhu, nearly 700,000 troops fought a bloody battle against 300,000 Japanese soldiers, and the total number of Japanese casualties was only 40,000 to 50,000. This is at the level of combat, and if placed in one division and one regiment, it would be even less. The number of Japanese soldiers killed or injured on the front line of the 88th Division's battlefield would never exceed 3,000, and that would already be a heroic achievement. Of course, the army captain who was busy arranging to snatch people would not have thought about what kind of history their lone army would create. In the ruts of past history, the arrogant Japanese army also ran into this sturdy fortress with their heads broken and blood flowing. And now, the little butterfly that broke through the air gently flapped its wings. Tang Dao seemed to have already guessed that someone would follow and stopped in the darkness, waiting for the two veteran soldiers, Youzi, who were carrying bullet bags and grenades. However, Tang Dao did not take the magazine and grenade, but only put 2 magazines into his wallet and confidently dropped a sentence. "Follow me, keep a distance of 15 meters." The two of them, who had long been impressed by Tang Dao's fierce and inhuman individual tactics, were not surprised. Originally, they were just observers, but now it's not a big deal to act as a mobile arsenal. Naturally, Tang Dao is the only one who follows suit. 3 people, 1 in front and 2 behind, plunged into the darkness. On a dilapidated street 800 meters away from the Sihang Warehouse, a team of about 15 Japanese soldiers, led by a flashlight-wielding Japanese commander Chow, were searching and advancing along the Suzhou River bank. Under the moonlight, the Japanese soldier Chow Chang, who was leading the way with a flashlight and his face covered in flesh, had a foul complexion as if he had just eaten 2 large buses, still warm. "I don't sleep at night and still have to work. It seems that my work pace is already in 007 mode, and who needs to be in a good mood to get started." As the captain of a small team of 15, Konosuke Inoue, who has served in the military for over 6 years, has already been feeling extremely depressed. Soaking in the cold muddy water for dozens of days and fighting against the Chinese may be tough, but what truly wears away the courage is watching a colleague's body stuffed into a corpse bag and transported to the rear, including several of his fellow villagers. Those people can no longer see the splendid cherry blossoms in their hometown. After finally waiting for the stubborn Chinese to retreat, he no longer had to soak in the cold mud and watch one colleague after another wail and place them in the fortifications, and then die helplessly, smelling like a salted fish. However, after only a few hours of preparation, due to a few gunshots coming from afar, the platoon leader kicked him up with leather boots and led his team to search on this hellish battlefield. It's just a few Chinese soldiers collapsing. Can they turn the sky? What's wrong with searching again during the day? As soon as he remembered that his other colleagues were already sleeping soundly by the warm campfire, while he still felt the fear of death in the darkness, Mitsunari Inoue wanted to stuff the head of his silly squad leader into a cesspit and eat shit, "You bastard." In front of a relatively intact building, Mitsui Inoue suddenly raised his hand to signal the team to stop moving forward. The Japanese army, who had pulled their troops to a length of over 30 meters with a distance of 2 meters between individual soldiers, stopped their steps in a disciplined manner and scattered around to find a suitable position to guard. Although it's all very painful, after all, this is still a battlefield, and if it's not easy, there will be cold shots. The Japanese infantry who are in pain don't want to have no chance in the future. P.S. I haven't changed my signing status yet, I estimate I'll get it on Friday. If you have any children's boots that you want to reward, wait until the weekend or next week to reward them. Also, it's not that Feng Yu didn't have any manuscripts, but he worked hard to save 40 chapters during the Chinese New Year. Just wait for the recommendation. Before that, let's start by posting more and more, with a focus on word count. In order to eat more and recommend better grades, Feng Yu can only do this. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Moonlight. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Moonlight. Captain Inoue, why don't we take a break here first? A Japanese soldier, with his 8-legged legs almost halfway up and down, approached and eagerly held a match, trying to light the fire for Inoue Guangsheng. With a lewd suggestion on his face, he said, "Not only can we make some money, but maybe there's also Hua Gunyang. Ba ga bastard, are you thinking about Flower Girl before the war ends?" The already depressed Inoue Guangsheng finally found a way to vent his frustration. He slapped his obscene subordinate with a big mouth, making him dizzy and disoriented. What kind of flower girl should this fool mention to him at such a moment? Don't you know that Chinese civilians have all gone to the concessions of the golden retrievers? Now in these ruins, apart from the swollen corpses soaked in rainwater that can suffocate people from afar, there are only wild dogs that feed on carrion. There are some things that I didn't think of. Once reminded, adult men's desires, which have been dormant for over 2 months, crazily rise up. However, they can only think but cannot do it. No wonder Inoue Guangsheng's big mouth almost didn't beat the guy who flatters his legs to doubt life. In the distance, sporadic gunshots could still be heard. Mitsunari Inoue knew that it was a small team sent by his own side and the Chinese soldiers who were alone in the ruins fighting each other. Although it was already evening, under the still bright moonlight and the light of the flares, those remaining grey mice would have nowhere to hide. The powerful Imperial Army undoubtedly won the final victory. I searched all the way and didn't find anything unusual. Perhaps the Chinese scattered soldier who made the sound of gunfire had already been killed by our search team. Mitsunari Inoue felt a little relaxed in his heart, at least he didn't have to constantly worry about being shot in the cold. Although the Chinese were weak, their performance in this battle was beyond the imagination of the Japanese army. They were strong and almost stubborn, with nearly 15% of the battle losses making the faces of Japanese commanders of all sizes extremely bitter. At this moment, a sudden noise came from over 30 meters away. The Japanese army became nervous and rolled to the temporary shelter they had already found, aiming their guns at the distance. The light of 3 flashlights immediately swept over. In the snowy beam of light, a dirty and almost indistinguishable wild dog with its tail between its legs leaped out of the ruins over 20 meters away, turning its head to look at its eyes. Under the beam of light, its eyes shimmered with a dense yellow light. The frightened Japanese soldiers couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. A Japanese soldier without hesitation fired his gun, and the precise marksmanship of a Japanese veteran who could hit a human body from 200 meters away, even in such a dim environment, hit the wild dog's hind leg with unparalleled precision. Endure. The wild dog let out a mournful but not sharp howl, struggling to climb into the ruins. Bastard, who told you to shoot? Mitsunari Inoue roared in a deep voice. Captain Inoue, the military supplies provided by those idiots in the logistics team are entirely for pigs. Do you think it's okay? The veteran who fired licked his lips and suggested to his own military commander. Looking around at the subordinates who involuntarily started licking their lips, and then thinking about the fragrant dog meat shining on the fire, Inoue Guangsheng felt that his saliva secretion was also accelerating. Indeed, 2 months after entering the battlefield, although canned beef is occasionally supplied, most of them are hard to swallow dry and cold rice and vegetable roll, and birds have long faded out of their mouths. Not to mention that, what's even more unbearable is the weather. Damn Chinese people, and damn the rainy days in Songhu, China. Not only is it drizzling with light rain, but the trenches are also muddy with almost no dry clothes on his body, making Inoue Guangsheng almost feel like a moldy salted fish, smelly and rotten. If he continues like this, even if he is not killed by Chinese guns, he will almost be disgusted to death by himself. At such times, if a bonfire is lit and fatty dog meat is grilled on top of it, it is simply a great beauty in life. Yaga. Expanding territory for the Empire of Japan is our mission. How can we blame our allies for this? Don't let me hear such complaints again in the future. Inoue Guang criticized his subordinates with a stern expression and some righteous words. Takeda, take 3 people to search over there. If you encounter any spoils of war, you can bring them back. The rest of you should rest in place, gather your strength, and then execute the captain's order. Hi. Takeda's 8-legged figure stood at attention and lowered his head, but his face was slightly less aggrieved. The swollen 8-legged figure on his face knew that Inoue Junchao had agreed to his suggestion, and what he had just said was just a show. As for the beating just now. Beating is kissing, cursing, and loving, isn't it? Not everyone can be beaten up by Cao Chang. Perhaps the spirit of AQ is not only present in China at this time. As the 4 Japanese soldiers under his command carried guns and searched towards the ruins where the injured wild dogs had crawled in, Mitsunari Inoue let out a faint sigh. Finally, we can rest for a while and wait for the beautiful dog meat. Kicking open the dilapidated wooden door of the 2-story building that was fortunately undamaged in the gunfire, he held a flashlight and shone inside for a while, making sure there was no one inside. He then sat down and relaxed, leaning his body against the relatively dry wall. 4 out of the remaining 10 Japanese soldiers walked into the small building, consisting of 2 grenade throwers from the squad, a light machine gun shooter, and a deputy shooter. They were not only of higher rank, but also because they were the heavy firepower guarantee of the squad. Wherever they were, they had to be protected by infantry, even during rest. The other 6 people were grouped in pairs, each 5 or 6 meters apart, huddled under the eaves of the small building, holding their own 3 or 8 large buildings. Just from the distribution of troops in the rest state of this small team, it can be seen that the Japanese army, known as the number 1 in Asia, was not given in vain. Even if it is not in a combat state, maintain sufficient vigilance, and any point attacked will be hit in several other directions. Even if a force 2 or 3 times higher than theirs were to besiege it, the grenade launchers and light machine guns located inside the house could provide enough firepower to counterattack and support the arrival of reinforcements. This is also the reason why Japanese commanders dared to send small teams as units and enter the ruins at night to clear out Chinese scattered soldiers, stemming from confidence and strength. And a few tens of meters away from the small building where the Japanese army was resting, 2 pairs of eyes were watching all of this in great shock. Veterans Youzi and Yang Shaoshan arrived here with Tang Dao as early as 20 minutes ago, and they can understand Tang Dao's choice of this area as a battlefield for cold fighting. After all, this place is separated from the brightly lit concession by the Suzhou River. The Moonlight and the remaining lights on the other side of the river are enough to ensure a line of sight within 30 meters. With his astonishing shooting skills, it should not be difficult to shoot a few cold shots at the Japanese army from a long distance and kill 2 or 3 devils. But what shocked them was how Tang Dao dared to confirm that the Japanese search team would rest in that small building. Tang Dao only came out a few minutes after entering the small building that had not collapsed by chance. The 2 elite members of the Imperial Guards would not think that Tang Dao had come specifically to visit. Otherwise, how could the 2 hand grenades he had originally inserted in his waist be missing? Did you leave it in the small building as a souvenir? End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Head to Head. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Head to Head. Of course, in this area, this small building is relatively intact, and it is normal for the Japanese to choose this place as a resting place, which is very in line with human normal psychology. How could Tang Dao be certain that the Japanese army would be interested in a wild dog? When they saw Tang Dao leap out of the darkness like a ghost and knock out the wild dog that was supposed to be a family dog without killing it, the 2 elite members of the Imperial Guards instinctively believed that Tang Dao was too kind and soft-hearted. If it were them, they would have killed the wild dog with their hands and knives. At this time, any factors that may expose their hiding place must not be allowed to exist. Unfortunately, Tang Dao didn't have it, and even had the leisure to wrap the wild dog's mouth around with a thin rope. Even if the wild dog woke up and was restrained by Tang Dao's big hand, it could only let out a low growl from its throat. Later on, it seemed to have accepted fate and didn't dare to hum anymore. Until the arrival of the Japanese army, Tang Dao did not leave. The wild dog that had gained freedom was probably scared hard, and it took a while before it dared to get up from the ground. If you are more careful, you can still see that the dog's tail is tightly sandwiched between its legs, which is a manifestation of extreme fear in dogs. Unfortunately, let alone the Japanese army not discovering it, even if they do, it's not normal for a wild dog to encounter a group of heavily armed and vicious Japanese soldiers with its tail between its legs. Can you still wag your tail at them? Just because it is a Chinese dog, it cannot be. Of course, the two elite members of the Imperial Guards do not know that the little butterfly that crossed over cannot be called the king of individual soldiers simply by relying on strong individual tactical skills such as combat, shooting, and tactical evasion. The variety of training subjects that Tang Dao received, not to mention their current era, is enough to make ordinary people amazed even in the future. Apart from combat-specific skills, the assessment of small subjects such as logical inference and human psychological analysis can only be considered moderately difficult. Mastering multiple languages, dressing up, customs and traditions of various countries, and even delving into industrial manufacturing, economics and finance. The strongest warrior from a century later, the most powerful is not the killing technique, but the mind. Songhu has been continuously rainy for almost a month. Although it is rare to clear up during this day, the ground is still slippery, especially in the evening. The autumn in southeastern China can blow the cold wind into your bones, and no one will want to sit on the damp and cold ground to rest. So, the well-preserved two-story building has become the best place to stay. Although winning the battle can stimulate the morale of the Japanese army, they are still human beings, and as humans, they will become tired. Once the goal is achieved, the spiritual stimulation brought by victory fades like a tide, and the physical fatigue that comes with it even exceeds that of the already defeated Chinese army. When resting, a fragrant piece of grilled dog meat is definitely the strongest desire of humans who have eaten dry and cold food for several months, which is even greater than the temptation brought by women. The most primitive instinct of living beings is not to lose energy, but to consume food to obtain energy and survive. So, two elite members of the Imperial Guards hiding tens of meters away were horrified to discover that everything Tang Dao had done before, which seemed unreliable, was so successful. For Japanese soldiers, holding flashlights, left the temporary stronghold of the Japanese squad and searched through the ruins where wild dogs had disappeared. The two of them knew that Tang Dao was right there. I don't know if it's because they are all Chinese nationals, but the wild dog scared by Tang Dao actually crawled back after being shot. The ruins, which are no more than 10 meters away from the hiding places of two elite members of the Imperial Guards, should be a once affluent residential area. From the scene, it is not difficult to determine that this residential building used to have 5 bungalows and a small courtyard, where flowers, plants, and an osmanthus tree were planted. It is not difficult to imagine that the owner of the small courtyard once delicately loved life. But now, they no longer exist. The drop of a .75 caliber mountain cannon shell changed everything. 5 bungalows were instantly destroyed, with 3.5 rooms. Among the ruins, only one house was connected to the other half of the house, and the main beam fell to the ground, tenaciously supporting the wall that should have been washed away by the shockwave. The small courtyard was devastated, with flowers and plants everywhere. The osmanthus tree was cut off by a piece of shrapnel, and its leaves remained lush green. The tree crown lay 5 or 6 meters away from half of the trunk, and most of the courtyard walls and gates naturally no longer exist. However, the courtyard wall, which is still more than 3 meters high, can block the view from the Japanese army squad. To see this side clearly, you must walk a distance of 20 meters towards it. In other words, if 4 Japanese soldiers walked in without making a loud noise, the Japanese soldiers over there would not have known. According to the thoughts of the 2 soldiers, the simplest way was to use Tang Dao's precise and intimidating marksmanship to kill 2 of them when the Japanese army approached without any precautions, and then escape into the ruins before the main force of the Japanese army could react. Despite the large number of Japanese soldiers, they are unable to accurately track Tang Dao in such an environment. They will report all the actions of Tang Dao without harming anyone, even if they receive their heads. The deputy of the regiment will definitely keep this guy with strong combat power, and everyone is happy. However, Tang Dao did not fire even as the Japanese army approached the ruins of the small courtyard almost 10 meters away. Everything was quiet, except for the wild dog that had climbed into the house, which let out a slight whimper due to pain. The two elite members of the Imperial Guards probably already know what Tang Dao wants to do by now. The Japanese army, who were eager to eat dog meat, certainly did not know what was waiting for them in the ruins. The light of the flashlight made them follow the bloodstains dripping from the injured wild dog into the ruins. As the leader of the Japanese army issued a low command, the 3 Japanese soldiers held guns and guarded in 3 directions. The leader of the Japanese army threw their guns to their companions, took the flashlight from them, pulled out the bayonet sheath hanging from their waist, held it in their right hand, and rushed straight into the house. The bright light of the flashlight allowed the leading Japanese soldiers to clearly see the injured wild dog curled up under a small square table in the room, with a hint of joy on its face. As his entire body entered the dark room, a pair of powerful hands slowly and gently descended from the sky, like raindrops gently falling from the sky a few days ago, so gentle that you couldn't feel its existence, but as cold as bone marrow. The Japanese army had already been captivated by the greasy dog meat that would be roasted in the future. He didn't even see it, nor could he actually see it. Right above him was a strong man, hanging upside down on a wooden beam from the ceiling with just 1 foot, stretching his originally curled-up body and reaching out to touch his head. It's a bit of a head-to-head killing. That's really about to kill someone if you hit your head. All living beings have an instinctive fear of death. The Japanese upper-class soldiers experienced a thrill for no reason, and their entire bodies were covered in sweat. Just as they were about to look up, one big hand first covered his mouth. Before he could start struggling, Tang Dao, who was hanging upside down, held onto his head with the other hand, bulging his arm muscles with force. The only sound he heard was a terrifying light click, and the Japanese, who were still relatively sturdy, suddenly collapsed. The rupture of the spinal nerve has caused complete loss of all functions below his neck, and an extremely unpleasant odor emanates from his crotch, which is the result of complete incontinence in both urine and urine. Tang Dao jumped down from above like a civet cat, using his legs to hold on to the body of the Japanese soldiers who were about to slide, and also caught the flashlight and bayonet that the Japanese soldiers had dropped. The intense pain in his eyes prevented the Japanese soldiers from seeing the attacker clearly. In front of him was both darkness and darkness. The sound of warning and calling for help to his companions was blocked in his throat by the powerful hand as big as a fan. The final sound was not only a terrifying cluck sound, but also a chicken with a twisted neck. This is a trap, a thought flashed through the Japanese army's mind, but it was also his last thought. Then, the surging darkness completely engulfed him, not only his eyes, but also his entire heart. The rupture of the spinal nerve and the lack of fresh oxygen supply to the respiratory tract for more than 20 seconds were enough to cause his brain to go into sleep. Of course, this is an irreversible sleep that cannot be awakened again. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Is just an appetizer. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 is just an appetizer. Although there was no smell of blood, perhaps the strong smell of death scared the wild dog hiding under the square table, and the little one who had already been hit by a bullet in the hind legs trembled and screamed in agony. Unfortunately, the dog's mouth was tied up and its barking remained the same as before, with a low moan. The 3 Japanese soldiers outside couldn't help but look towards this side strangely. The dog's barking wasn't strange, but out of common sense, the barking was a bit too low. Perhaps it's the deputy team leader who doesn't want the dog barking too harshly to cause unnecessary trouble. This is logical, and the 3 Japanese infantry reached an agreement through eye contact. Inside, Tang Dao held the completely limp body in his arms, treating it gently as if it were his lover. With one hand resting under the armpit of the corpse, he moved his steps towards the door. The light of the flashlight flickered a few times towards the outside, and a somewhat blurry Japanese sound sounded. "Bastard! Someone help!" 3 Japanese soldiers were slightly taken aback, and one of the farthest Japanese infantry soldiers quickly reacted. They put away their guns and ran over, their dog-legged appearance proving that Tang Dao's guess was correct. The body in his arms is the highest ranking among the 4 Japanese soldiers, and as for why this obviously leading Japanese army came to do the rough work of killing dogs, it may be to demonstrate his martial courage. After all, it's not just about seeing blood, but also about speaking up to save face. Tang Dao is not a god, of course he cannot guess all the psychological activities of the Japanese army. In fact, the leader of the Japanese army, named Takeda Nagashi, was doing pig-killing work before joining the army. This time, he took the initiative to slaughter dogs, which was purely a bit difficult to bear. However, he did not expect his skills to be demonstrated, but he encountered Tang Dao, the god of killing who waited for rabbits and plants, and lost his life. The Japanese army, who rushed over excitedly, saw their deputy team leader standing in front of the door under the moonlight. Just as they were about to speak, their eyes were flickered by the strong light of a flashlight, making it impossible to see anything clearly. They heard a murmur of unclear Japanese, didn't hesitate to ask again, and quickly entered the room. The room was dark, and the pupils that had just been flickered by a flashlight were slightly contracting. If nothing unexpected happened, the human pupils would naturally adjust, allowing him to adapt to the light in 3 seconds. But obviously, Tang Dao will not give him this opportunity. As he pushed the body in his arms forward, the Japanese army, who had just been able to see the figure of his colleagues, instinctively helped him, but was completely out of control. The body, weighing over 100 pounds, took him off center of gravity. Surprised, he opened his mouth and the sound of inquiry was still in his throat. A bayonet suddenly pierced through his open mouth, and the cold blade rubbed against his soft tongue, cutting off the small tongue that could vibrate and make sound, then cutting through the trachea and finally penetrating his neck. At the same time, all the voices were blocked in the throat of the Japanese army. The Japanese army widened their eyes in fear, hoping to discover the attacker, but even then he instinctively grabbed the dead bodies of his colleagues and did not leave them behind because he was suddenly attacked. So, an extremely eerie scene appeared inside the room. A Japanese soldier with a bayonet suddenly growing out of his mouth stared up at a corpse, while the person he was trying to see clearly slowly stood up straight and held the handle of the bayonet with one hand. The Japanese army's eyes showed despair and pleading. He knew that once the bayonet was pulled out, he would immediately die. He doesn't want to die, even if he knows he can't live anymore, even if he lives for an extra 10 seconds, it's still good. Unfortunately, the tall figure was far more cruel and ruthless than he had imagined. With a sudden pull, the Japanese army spewed out a blood flower from their mouth and fell to the sky. The loud bang startled the 2 Japanese soldiers, causing them to turn back in shock. Then, a spear with a good bayonet flew out of the house like a javelin, stabbing one of the Japanese soldiers and penetrating their chest. The tremendous force even knocked him down and nailed him to the ground. Pa go! The only remaining Japanese soldier fiercely shot into the house, and even pulled off the melon grenade hanging from his waist at the fastest speed. With unparalleled decisiveness, only veterans can make the most accurate judgment in that moment. The colleagues inside the house must have been ruined, and without any hesitation, they fired and planned to throw grenades to kill the strong enemy inside the house. Or, to eliminate the threat, the life and death of colleagues are no longer as important. From any perspective, this Japanese soldier who erupted into a fighting posture can already be considered a standard war machine, decisive and fierce. However, he only knew that there were enemies inside the house, and he didn't know. Just behind him, less than 15 meters away, there were 2 soldiers from the Chinese Ace Infantry Division who had been paying attention to this place without even blinking their eyelids. When Tang Dao threw 3 or 8 large roofs from inside the house and nailed the Japanese soldiers in the courtyard to the ground, Yang Shaoshan had already aimed his gun at another Japanese soldier. As the Japanese soldiers quickly turned around and pulled off their grenades, he fired without hesitation. The shooting distance of 15 meters is too close for an infantry soldier from a Chinese Ace Infantry Division. The 7.92 caliber bullet of the Chinese official rifle crossed a space of less than 20 meters and fiercely collided with the Japanese 90 steel helmet. With the sufficient kinetic energy of the bullet, the steel helmet, which was originally mainly used to defend against shell fragments, was like a fragile piece of paper easily torn apart by the bullet and penetrated into the back of the head. Shoot your head with one shot. From Tang Dao's perspective, the Japanese soldiers who happened to face him had a sudden burst of blood on their faces. So, after firing the gun, young Xiaoshan and veteran Youzi saw the thumb protruding from the room, as well as Tang Dao's smiling face protruding from the room. They moved their lips as if saying something to the two, but in silence. It is obvious that Tang Dao had already taken into account the two Imperial Guard observers since he was preparing to slaughter these 4 Japanese soldiers. He calculated that they would shoot, and from the beginning, it was a game where Tang Dao counted both the enemy and his own people. However, young Xiaoshan didn't have time to think about how Tang Dao calculated that he would definitely shoot, let alone to guess what he said to the two of them. "Tang Dao, you bastard." The veteran Youzi's face trembled and he let out a strange cry, "Run." He grabbed young Xiaoshan and climbed up, rushing towards the depths of the ruins. Because he finally figured out what the mouth shape of Tang Dao was under the moonlight, and it was clearly "Run." That's right, Tang Dao doesn't have to run, he didn't shoot, did he? They were the ones who exposed the location with the gunshot. Speaking of other things may not mean much, but when it comes to the ability to save lives, veteran Youzi is the top strong man in the entire 524 regiment. It has been proven that veteran oilseed Li Jiujin is really amazing. Quick thinking and fast running. 10 seconds later, a flare was fired into the air, shining brightly within a radius of 200 meters. A row of bullets shot from the direction of the small building accurately hit the place where the two had once hidden. Subsequently, there was a loud explosion, and bricks, stones, plants, and trees flew around in disorder. The skilled grenade throwers of the Japanese army were able to accurately deliver grenades to a distance of 500 meters after 2 test shots, with an error of no more than 5 meters. They were one of the most hated branches of Chinese machine gunners on the battlefield of the Sino-Japanese decisive battle. The vast majority of the firepower points of Chinese light machine guns were damaged on seemingly rudimentary but highly effective light handheld mortars equipped by the Japanese army, rather than due to heavy artillery. The Japanese grenade thrower located in the small building once again showed his style. In just over 20 seconds, he completed the entire process of calibration, loading, and projection, and it was extremely accurate. 2 consecutive rounds of grenades exploded into flames at the positions where the two had previously hidden. If the two had any doubts, they would probably have been blown into several pieces. Of course, this also resulted in them not having the opportunity to see a much more exciting scene than just now. Killing 3 Japanese soldiers with bare hands was actually just an appetizer for Tang Dao, and the hardest dish was still ahead. After all, the Japanese army, a small team of 15 with machine guns and grenade launchers, still has 2/3 of its troops, right? P.S. Children's boots with monthly tickets, please vote for them. Children's boots that can be rewarded, please gather on Monday. Thank you everyone. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Fierce Opponents. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Fierce opponents. Under the moonlight, standing in the ruins courtyard, Inoue Guangxing's face looked as if he had eaten a few more buses and had eaten too much. In front of him was a corpse with a big hole in the head and a subordinate with a rifle in his chest still twitching slightly. Judging from his waxen face, it was clear that there was no need for rescue. Even though his lips were moving and he wanted to say something, the Japanese military commander was too angry to lie down and listen. Inside, there were 2 dead fools, including his deputy team leader. Just wanting to have a grilled dog meat and spending 4 lives, is life really so difficult? At that moment, Mitsunari Inoue's mind was really buzzing. He doesn't even know if the squadron leader would cut off his dog head with a single blow if he knew the truth. Really, at that moment, the Japanese military commander really had this kind of self-blame. Bah goddamn the Chinese, I'm going to skin him. Inoue Guangxing gritted his teeth and growled low, his fierce expression making several Japanese soldiers standing around hesitant to look directly. No one dares to take the angry but useless self-talk of their team leader, afraid that he will vent his anger on themselves. The Japanese army had a strict hierarchy, and although a small squad leader at the rank of a sergeant had no authority to take life or death from soldiers, it was only common for them to get a few slaps or kicks. However, he said he wanted to skin the attacker, but his body was very honest. Inoue Guangxing ultimately did not send a soldier to chase after the two Chinese soldiers who were frantically fleeing in the ruins. Yes, after seeing the location and cause of death of the 4 corpses on our side, the experienced Japanese military commander immediately determined that there was not just one attacker, at least 2 or 3 inside the house, and 2 or 3 outside. Otherwise, even with the arrival of the heavenly brightness god, it would be difficult to simply use cold weapons to kill 3 of our own soldiers and then shoot the subordinate who fired from another direction. And perhaps only a part of them were attacked by our own side, while the other part naturally fled to other areas with the help of darkness and ruins. It is right to pursue the poor bandits with remaining courage, but now there is only anger and no courage. Moreover, what puzzled the Japanese military commander was that they had originally come to kill the wild dog, but now the bodies of the 4 subordinates are here, but the wild dog is missing. People can use complex geographical environments to escape. Can an injured wild dog also learn how to do so? The only explanation for the incomprehensible phenomenon can only be that the fleeing Chinese took away the wild dogs. With a slight thought, he ordered several Japanese soldiers around him to carefully examine the ground inside and outside the house with flashlights. Finally, he found the slightest trace. Unlike the splattered bloodstains of my subordinates being killed by cold weapons, a few drops of blood dripped onto the wall and disappeared behind the house. Obviously, his speculation is getting closer to the truth. If it weren't for the attacker inside the house getting injured in the fight, it would be not only that he escaped on his own, but also brought the injured wild dog with him. According to the strange twisting of the neck of the deputy team leader inside the room and the terrifying wound of another subordinate's mouth, throat, and trachea being cut to a mess, the opponents are all killing with one strike, and there is no chance for them to resist. Otherwise, at least a shout would be made, and the possibility of the attacker being injured is extremely low. As for why the attacker made such a boring move, it was beyond Kazuo Inoue's imagination. Yes, Mitsumasa Inoue inferred most of Tang Dao's movements through the clues on the battlefield, but he had no idea about his opponent. In fact, even if he knew, it was hard to believe that at such a time, Tang Dao would choose to leave with a wild dog that might reveal his whereabouts. In fact, the reason why Tang Dao took away the wild dog was so simple that it was unbelievable. The moonlight shone like water, shining right into the room. Tang Dao, who had originally planned to leave, unintentionally met the wild dog he had thrown out as bait. The wild dog, curled up in a ball, had a deep sadness in its eyes. The wild dog, frightened by the strong smell of blood inside the house, should have been living in this small courtyard all along. Perhaps it has been abandoned by its owner, or perhaps its owner has died under that shell. The domestic dog has become a wild dog, but has never left the home it once guarded. Even if it is hit by a bullet, it still struggles to climb back into the house. And that small square table may be its most common place to stay, where it can obtain leftover food and bones from its owner. Everything has a spirit, and Tang Dao felt at that moment that the wild dog was not only sad to know that it was going to die, but also unable to protect this small courtyard that had become ruins anymore. Perhaps it's because of the beginning of this era. Everything in front of me was far more tragic than all the materials, but Tang Dao, who was as firm as iron, felt a slight softening in his heart at that time. Don't be afraid, I'll take you away from here. After finishing the Japanese, I'll set you free. Whether you can survive or not depends on your fate. Tang Dao crouched down and gently comforted the bony wild dog. And miraculously, the wild dog seemed to understand, wagging its tail lightly and touching Tang Dao's hand with its nose, as a gesture of reconciliation towards the bandit who had once knocked itself unconscious with a single slap. So, Tang Dao left with an extremely unscientific burden and left a very difficult puzzle for the Japanese military commander, so much so that the Japanese military commander, who was too imaginative, ignored the more important issue. Since the attackers dared to attack 4 fully armed soldiers, would they still be interested in the remaining 11 of them? Of course, even if the Japanese military commander thought of it, he would choose to skip it. The combat effectiveness of the Imperial Japanese Army is unparalleled in Asia, even if it is just a small team. Even a Chinese infantry platoon cannot take advantage of it. This is not arrogance, but confidence accumulated through continuous victories. So, the Japanese military commander who demonstrated extremely strong abilities soon suffered a second blow tonight. 2 more soldiers died and 2 were seriously injured. However, it was not because the attackers reappeared, but because they were killed by their own people. To be more precise, it was killed by a dead body with its head blown out. Companions are calves, but the body must be brought back, burned into ashes, and sent back to the country, otherwise the soul cannot return to its homeland. This is almost an unwritten rule within the Japanese army. So, when 2 Japanese soldiers went to lift the dead body, blue smoke began to rise from underneath. It was obvious during the day, but it was covered up in the faint darkness. When the Japanese army smelled something unusual, it was already too late. The combined power of 4 Japanese melon torpedoes and a wooden long-handled grenade is never less than that of a mortar shell. After a loud bang, 2 Japanese soldiers responsible for transporting corpses were killed on the spot. 1 Japanese soldier, who was 5 meters away from them, was overturned by the shockwave, and another unlucky person, who had dodged the shockwave about 10 meters away, was completely disabled in the thigh by flying shrapnel. The Japanese soldier Chow, who relied on his strong predictive ability to lie down in time, narrowly escaped a disaster, but could only painfully realize that he was missing 2 more subordinates. Inoue Guangsheng finally knew what the wounded soldier who was about to die earlier wanted to say. He probably wanted to tell himself that the enemy had played tricks on the corpse. However, he didn't have time to regret it, and the pain was not just being killed by 2 more. But rather the guy who spat out blood and brought it back, basically just a dead guy, and the unlucky guy who was howling on the ground with his injured leg covered. In fact, these 2 goods are cleaner than dead. Because at least 4 people need to carry them. Unfortunately, with him added here, there were only 3 people left, and the machine gun team and grenade launcher team were still placed inside the small building by him. That way, it can not only prevent being shot coldly, but also provide firepower reinforcement to this side. Do you want to call them all over to pick up the wounded and corpses? As soon as his thoughts reached this point, Konosuke Inoue suddenly widened his eyes in fear. The attackers had the ability to kill 3 fully armed soldiers and cunningly placed lead bombs under the bodies, all showing that they were a terrifying enemy. Will such a terrible enemy easily leave? Obviously not. I have searched before and he is not here. Where will he be? The answer is already obvious. End of this chapter.